Hello and welcome. What does it mean for a company that's in everything from jet engines to thermostats to go into the digital era? Well, let's find out from the man himself, David Cote, of Executive Chairman of Honeywell. Mr. Cote, thank you very much for speaking with us.
Nice to be here.
So tell us, firstly a layman's question and then maybe not so layman's. What does it mean today for a company like you, which is very ubiquitous, everything from retail products to products that we really don't see, to be in the digital era?
Oh, it's going to be huge, and it's because what people would refer to as the Internet of Things or the industrial internet, however you want to talk about it. But we're moving from what historically has been a digital to digital experience, your iPhone interacting with a website or an app, to a digital to physical experience. And that's going to be very different because now you need to have an understanding of the digital side, but you also need to have an understanding of the physical side, the domain knowledge, if you will, and how they interact. Because if you're going to affect what's happening on the physical side digitally, well, you need to understand what actually happens here. That's going to be a big deal for us, and I think it's going to be a big deal for the entire century for industry across the world. It's a big deal for us because, as you pointed out, we make jet engines, turbochargers, chemicals, process technologies for petrochemical and refinery plants. We do all kinds of stuff, control systems.
Including stuff you see inside hotel rooms where you adjust the
Yeah,
temperature.
exactly. It's all kinds of things, and generally it goes into things that people use. So if you take a look at that and said, okay, based on everything he said they do, and I said, okay, so we have 23,000 engineers. Describe for me the composition. What engineering disciplines are those 23,000 engineers in? You'd most likely say mechanical, electrical, and chemical. The fact is, of our 23,000 engineers, almost half are developing software. It's not mechanical, electrical, or chemical. It's developing the software that's going to interact in those three disciplines. So for us, about 11,500 engineers are already developing software. That's going to become a bigger and bigger component of what we do, and it's going to transform the century. The reason it's going to transform the century is we may be impressed with computing power today, but if you assume that computing power continues to double every 2 years the way it has in the past, some people would say it won't. I don't agree with them. They've been saying that sort of thing for 20 years and it keeps finding a way. So let's assume it doubles every 2 years. 10 years from now, we will have 32 times the computing power we do today. In 20 years, we will have over 1,000 times the computing power we do today. And you start to think about what that could enable, and quite honestly, none of us can even envision where it's going to go. If you have over 1,000 times the computing power we do today, 20 years from now, it's tough to imagine all the things that are possible. But they are coming, and it's going to have a big impact on companies like Honeywell and the entire industrial sector.
Right. Can you illustrate for us with one example or one vertical how these 11,500 engineers are actually changing the way either the product interacts with the digital world, your physical product interacts with the digital world, and where do customers or consumers see it, and how do they experience it, or how has that experience changed?
It's probably not going to be as exciting an example for you because it's industrial.
Sure.
But if you think about being in a refinery, there used to be all kinds of edge devices. There still are. There's all kinds of edge devices, sensing things all the way around. Well, what used to have to happen is somebody would kind of go out and record whatever they had learned. You start to get to a point, though, where you can actually put a little piece of software in each of those meters, and now the guy can walk by with a meter and kind of pick it up as he walks along. Well, because there's a little piece of software in there, you can make it a little more powerful as computing power exists and connectivity improves, and now you can actually have the signal sent from that device to the center. And you don't even need that guy to walk around anymore. So somebody can look at the machine in the center and say, okay, here's what needs to be done. With a few more advances in computing power, that person doesn't even need to look at it anymore. It's automatically, the data is automatically accumulated. The machine is analyzing it, determining where there might be a problem, where there might not, or what changes need to occur in the system, and it can do it automatically. You're going to see more and more of that everywhere, whether it's how you control buildings, how you control factories, aircraft, everything is going to be affected by it.
Right. So as you talked about the engineers and how their skill sets are changing, in this globalized world, where are you finding and sourcing those skill sets? What's fundamentally changing there?
Well,
or the less globalized world?
It was one of my reasons for coming to India 15 years ago, because we went from about 500 people in India to having over 13,000 today. And one of the reasons that we did it is that the U.S. did not have all the skills that were needed. India did. So I needed to go someplace where we already were driving CMMI level 5 and where there was capability and we were able to get it. It's still, I would say, going to be a shortage generally over at least the next 10 or 20 years, because not enough kids in the US or India are going into understanding IT, and we need more of that. We're just going to need more of that kind of resource. So I'm a big fan of both countries, the US and India, supporting programming, math, and science in schools so that kids learn. We're all going to need that capability.
Right. So at the same time, I mean, many countries are raising their walls. I mean, there are concerns about H-1B visas. I'm not saying it's a concern for Honeywell, but in general, there are concerns about migration of talent or free flow of talent. Is that an issue for you as someone who runs a large global multinational? Well,
I'm a believer that protectionism is generally not going to be a good thing for any country, and that's true in India also. India is as protectionist as any country out there, and I think that's one of the things that, if changed, would really improve productivity in the country and improve standard of living for India. I worry about that same sort of thing in the U.S. is we need talent there, and if you can't hire them in the U.S., you do like me and have to go elsewhere to be able to get them. So did that really benefit the U.S. if I'm having to hire in India or China to get the kind of resources that I need when I could have brought them to the U.S. on a H-1B visa? So I'm hoping that the rhetoric starts to cool and countries around the world look at it and start to realize what global trade actually does for them. Instead, every country focuses on whatever the negative is for them and doesn't look at all the positives that come, and the positives generally far outweigh the negatives. And I'm hoping that attitude starts to come back around, because it's not a good trend for the world.
Right. Let me go back to the physical versus digital. So a lot of resources are going into the digital domain, as it were. Does it mean that the number of people who produce physical goods will come down, or are we producing less physical goods? What does that mean for a company like Honeywell?
My guess is, because it's a combination of two things, right? One is how much output do you have? And then the second is how many people do you need to generate that output? So you could very well find that because of productivity and that impact of digital, physical goods become half the cost they do today, which means there's going to be a lot more of it. So you could find that 20 years from now, we're using twice of everything that we have. You may be able to need less people per unit, but you still may need more people in order to meet the volume requirement. And I think that's where people fall short a little bit when they think about productivity, is they just assume productivity just means job loss. There is job loss that occurs with productivity, but it is generally more than offset by the fact that people use more or need more than they did before. So my guess is you'll find more employment in manufacturing 20 years from now than you do today, but it's not going to be commensurate with whatever the volume increase is.
Right. And how are you viewing very specifically markets like India and China as markets and as sources for skills and resources?
China, I would
in the near term. Sorry.
China has been good for a long time. China is actually our biggest country for sales now outside the U.S. So it's become very important for us. And they were doing all the things they needed to keep their economy growing. India has just started down that path again. And I'm hopeful that they don't let up on the gas on change, the changes that are still needed. And I tend to look at the 1990s with Manmohan Singh when he was the finance minister and made a number of changes. The economy started to do better, and it was almost like everybody forgot, the government and everybody else forgot, that there was still a lot more change to come. It was like everybody figured, okay, we're done now. Well, PM Modi has been able to come in and make a number of changes and get things going again. Well, if the government and the people start to think, okay, now we're done with change again, things are good, it's going to fall apart just like it did last time. It'll just get this kind of stasis level and won't go any higher. There's a lot of change still required in India, and I'm hopeful that the people and the government will support the PM with all the changes he knows needs to come and that I see him driving.
Right, and would that specifically be in manufacturing?
Oh, it's across the board.
Okay.
India has the second worst tax system in the world. It's exceeded only by Brazil's, which is worse. And Indian CEOs will say the same thing I will. Protectionism is still rampant in India. Retail is still not unleashed the way that it could be. And retail, aggressive retail, to me, is important to drive productivity throughout a system, because if you have aggressive retail competing for consumers, they put pressure on people like me who produce the products that go into their products. I put pressure on my suppliers, they put pressure on theirs to become more productive throughout the chain. Another big potential development for India, getting broadband across to the entire country. As I understand it, only 75% of the country is covered with strong broadband today. Building education levels so that everybody in the country has a chance. There's a lot of things that still need to happen in India. So I'm very hopeful everybody supports the PM's agenda and allows those changes to happen, and that a democracy too often runs into just wanting to argue with itself as opposed and vying for political power for their party. The same is true in the US, by the way. And what we need in India is for the parties to work together for the common good.
Right. Last question. So prognosis for the year or two ahead, what are you seeing in terms of opportunities as well as challenges that follow from that?
In India or
no,
globally?
Globally as a company.
Yeah, barring some geopolitical crisis of some kind, I actually think things are good for the next 3, maybe 5 years. And it's because you look at consumer balance sheets, they're in the US and elsewhere, they're in good shape. Industrial balance sheets or company balance sheets are good. Bank balance sheets are good. Capacity utilization is still low. So I actually, I don't see anything that causes a problem. Now sometimes some of us worry that because we can't see a potential problem, that's even worse because it's going to hit even harder. But I don't see anything that puts a crisis on the horizon right yet. And as bad as the last crisis was, we never really had a recovery. Other than 2010, it wasn't a big recovery. So I think this can go on, this global recovery can go on much longer, at least 3 to 5 years, assuming there's no geopolitical crisis of some kind.
Right, that's a good note to end on. Thank you very much for speaking with us, Mr. Cote.
And nice to meet you.